the way we work as humans is that our brains try to create certainty in our environment. There's a couple of functions that our brains pretty much will focus on above everything else. And one of them is predicting what's going to happen next, or creating some certainty. So anytime there's a gap in information, our brains essentially will come up with a bit of a story to fill that gap. So, this is probably what's happening. So, people listening can probably relate to that when you, for example, hear nothing back about some work that you've done, and your brain fills you with all of these ideas around, oh my goodness, I must have stuffed up. They must think it's awful. And you come up with all these scenarios in your mind, just the same as when you're dating somebody and they don't text you back or whatever. You come up with all of these stories in your mind. But really, they're just the stories that your mind is coming up with to try and create a bit of certainty, because our brains are trying to do that to keep us alive, essentially. We're still wired in that same way. So when it comes to receiving feedback, the same thing can kick in. Again, when we get that vague piece of feedback, we will often think the worst. We'll come up with a story and we'll often think the worst, because we're also wired to kind of focus on the negative stuff, to look out for the threats and the dangers that might be there psychologically or physically. That's just how we're wired. When it comes to receiving feedback, I think one of the big things that you can do is try your best to actually be curious and open and figure out, well, what is the message here? What is it that this person's trying to convey? Even if they're not doing it quite so well, they haven't nailed the feedback conversation. First of all, they're possibly nervous or feeling a little bit uncomfortable themselves. But how can I ask questions to dig into that? So that's one thing, looking beyond the kind of surface level feedback or the label that might be getting used, and asking questions around that. Another thing I think is useful is to help the person sort of narrow it down. Like, what are the one or two things that I could focus on first, or what would be the critical thing that you would like to see me do? And asking questions around where the feedback has come from and where the feedback is going. So if you think about feedback, it's come from somewhere. It's got kind of a past, if you like. It's come from something they've observed or something that has occurred. And then it's got a future in the sense of what needs to change. So asking questions around that. So, for example, what have you observed? What am I missing? What have I been doing that I haven't noticed to build that self-awareness? And then, well, what does this mean for me going forward? What does good look like? What do I need to do differently? And reflecting and paraphrasing that back is another great tip I would give too. So somebody is sharing something, just playing it back in your own words. So you're saying, instead of doing X, I should do Y. Is that what you mean? Or when you talk about teamwork, what do you mean by that? What does that look like in your mind? What does good look like? So asking those questions to help the person be more crisp and clear and specific.
If this culture clip helped you, hit that like button below, and we'll see you in the next clip.